Train was late, so I will be late, Angel says.
All right.
We're good.
So we'll call this session of the work session together to, God, I can almost spit this out. Call it to order and start talking about the comprehensive plan with our senior planner, David Levitan.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Gamba, councilors. David Levitan, senior planner. So we are here tonight, actually this afternoon, to talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan policy document, which we've spent the last couple of years on developing the policies, and we've been working on the last few months actual production of the document. And so included in your packet was the first draft of the document that went out on Friday. We've subsequently made a couple of additional edits, added some call-out boxes and other items that where there were kind of blank areas in there. Yeah, we just wanted to get the initial feedback from the council to see kind of if we're headed in the right direction. So I have just a couple of slides for tonight. So as I mentioned, we're really looking for kind of high-level comments on the readability, the flow, the layout of the document. It was posted on the city website and on the project website on Friday, December 13th. As I mentioned, we've updated it slightly. We updated it a little bit today and posted an updated version to the website. It's been reviewed so far by the Planning Commission last Tuesday, and then by the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee last night. So obviously Mayor Gamba and Councilor Beatty took a look at it as part of that and provided some initial comments, and we look forward to additional comments from the full council. And then looking forward, we are scheduled for our first public hearing before the Planning Commission on January 14th. So just a little bit about the document before we get into the comments. In general, there's an introduction to the document, which is followed by land use categories, which are kind of being carried over on a temporary basis as we start to look at some of our code work, some of the middle housing options where we're going to be updating some of our land use designations and the implementing zoning districts. But we needed to at least maintain the categories that we have on the books right now. And then really the meat and potatoes of the document is the 4 chapters where there are multiple sections per chapter. They've been grouped together to kind of correspond to the vision super actions. And they include a chapter introduction, some section background, and then really getting into the goals and policies. And then there's graphics, call-out boxes that, you know, we try to provide some graphical context, and then some explanatory call-out boxes as well to kind of try to simplify some of the more technical terms. And then a glossary at the end. So this is an example of what one of the updated sections looks a little bit more updated maybe than the version that you included. But looking at this, just kind of looking at the layout of the document, and before I forget, I just wanted to commend Mary Heberlein, who was responsible for the layout and the design of the document. She's done really fabulous work. You know, working on this while also still doing land use applications and all the other things that we do. And I think it looks great, and we've gotten really good preliminary feedback up to date, up to this point, and so I just wanted to commend her on that. But if you look on the left column, so basically what we're trying to do is make it so people know where they're at with the document. So that stewardship and resiliency is the chapter that you're in. And then it's the natural resources and environmental quality section of that. There's an overarching section goal, which kind of lays out really what the section is all about. Then it kind of gets into the goals and the policies. If you look down at the bottom with policy 3.1.4, it's an example of where we've instituted a call-out box to kind of talk a little about it, in this case, a little bit about the difference between wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors. So that's the general idea as far as when we really kind of get into the weeds in some of these policies, we start using terms maybe that people don't all know about, you know, people that aren't really steeped in comprehensive planning, land use planning, and we wanted to make sure that we had some areas where we could really provide some very simple definitions of some of these terms. So really what we're here tonight and what was included in your staff report, we had 4 questions that were included in there, and so that's really the feedback that we're looking for tonight. So the questions were, does the document meet the council's expectations in terms of readability and layout? Do you have suggestions on how to improve the document? Do you have any comments related to the introductions and the background sections of the document? Are they too long? Are they too short? Do they provide the necessary context? And then are there images, graphics, or maps that should be added, deleted, revised to make it more informative and or easier to read? And with that, I would open it up to the council and just, I think, just a nice discussion of the document and ways that we can continue to improve it.
So CPAC had a meeting last night. So was there anything from CPAC from last night that needed to be added that we wouldn't have at this point? Or-
What a naive question. Was there anything from CPAC last night? There's always something from
Hopeful,
CPAC.
not naive.
Right. I mean, we are asking the citizens to give us input
Yeah.
so we can make decisions
There was-
based on
there
what
was a
they
whole-
want and need.
Sure.
So-
Well, that group is never short on input.
Well, yes, so,
I mean, but a lot of it was
they might have,
tweaking this language or that language. It was probably getting more into the weeds than David and Denny had actually hoped that it would get.
Smithers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can provide, kind of going back to the Planning Commission last week, a couple of the main things that they noted were just providing, there were some multiple comments on the kind of the main document introduction and providing a little bit more, especially on Native American history. There was some thoughts that it was a little too short and curt and approaching dismissive in tone in some of the areas, and so
That was from the PCE?
that was from the Planning Commission, and Commissioner Hemer, who's very knowledgeable about the history of Milwaukee, I've reached out to him to basically offer him an opportunity to provide some language to help to improve that section. And he's already submitted that, and I appreciate his efforts and his passion for the history of Milwaukee. Especially the earlier version, in which is, I think, still the one that you have, there was a little bit of repetition among images, and so that was something that we heard graphically, is just to try to diversify the images a little bit more. The CPAC last night went a little bit further on that as far as wanting, diversity both in human beings as far as ethnically, culturally, a little bit more diversity in the photos, provide species as well, wildlife, making sure that we have wildlife featured in there, especially within the sections, within the natural resources and environmental quality, to show a little bit more of that.
Geese, definitely
Geese
geese.
is-
Oh, we had a
We had a
geese, yeah. We had
discussion
someone worried about the habitat for the geese. I thought that was interesting. Yeah,
So,
I think they're okay.
yeah, I think that.
They're right up there with cockroaches, as far as I can tell.
I know that Jordan has an image of the geese of Milwaukee that maybe we'll try to feature and document. It's very
What have I
loving.
done? What have I done?
And so those were some comments. And then on the call-out boxes, just making sure that they're a little bit closer to the policy that they're explaining in an earlier version. They're kind of, sometimes they cross pages, and the policy will be at the top, and the call-out box will have a little dotted line that goes all the way down to the bottom. And so just some things that, until you really lay it out and show it to someone, it was all really good feedback, kind of that level. Stefan being Stefan, right after we had told him not to get into the weeds on the policies, he did, but we love Stefan for that. So we have a whole bunch of additional remaining comments on some of the policy language, but really, and I would welcome comments from Mayor Gamba and Councilor Beatty. The CPAC was very appreciative and had very kind words about it, and I think that we're well on our way to, there's obviously still things that we need to work on, but I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, I would start with to commend Mary for the outstanding first draft. It's beautiful. And I found it to be easy to find things and easy to read. And I think the few tweaks that we did last night make sense, moving some of the call-out boxes around and additional photography, I thought made sense.
I think the one thing that maybe staff was going to kind of revisit was the land use designation pages, right? I mean, there was definitely a feeling that those,
It's a little confusing.
yeah.
Yeah, so one of the comments on the land use designations was, one, but just by including photographs that people might really zero in on those. So we've discussed, getting rid of the actual photos and just relying on the icons, which I think the icons are pretty helpful, that they show kind of the mix of different housing types that are permitted.
I think people were even confused by the icons a
The
little bit,
icons.
though.
I have to say that this, going back to what was discussed at CPAC as the means to start our conversation, is really confusing me in terms of how to give feedback.
Blame her.
No, I thought it was a good question, but I guess I don't know that I feel like I'm just going to end up making my same comments.
Incorporated, or if there were some big ahas from last night.
Right.
Yeah, we haven't,
Planning Commission the week before, so.
yeah, we haven't incorporated anything yet, obviously, because the meeting was just last night. And we have a list of comments from the Planning Commission as well that we haven't.
So you're really just looking for, you're collating
Yeah, we're
feedback from
collating
everyone at this
comments
point.
and feedback at this
Okay.
point, from the CPAC, Planning Commission, Council, the general public, and then we'll be incorporating that over the next few weeks in advance of needing to publish it in advance of the January 14th public hearing.
It was a good question, Wilda. I was feeling,
right, okay.
no, it was. No, it was. I was just feeling like I was still going to have the comments that I was going to have anyway. And this jumping around is really, this is a huge document. And I think it would be helpful for me if we went through and, if there are broad overview comments that people want to make that apply to the entire document, give those first, and then go through briefly touching on each section. Just a thought. Because
Well, I
otherwise I'm
mean,
going to be all over the map.
If you have
Do we need to do that?
Maybe we don't, but there's just the background information in each section.
Comment, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I expect to do a kind of a close read and line edit kind of
Yeah.
thing and sit down with staff on that. I don't intend to do that at a meeting, but
Sure,
Yeah.
and this is very clearly, we are being asked for big picture.
Bigger
So
picture,
we're not
yeah.
being asked for policy
Yeah.
tweaking.
Yeah.
It's really about the introduction sections
Yeah.
and the background section. So I get that, but yeah, I'm just feeling spazzy
Go ahead.
talking about this all over the
Do
place.
your-
Do my thing. Well, I don't have part of the problem is that my list is WS 37. I don't have it organized very well, so part of this is me trying to cover for the fact that I didn't organize my notes the way I should have. I would say overall, yes, it looks great. I was so excited to get to this stage and to see this as a working document in a way that makes it really concrete, and I think it does read beautifully. I think there's a nice balance between graphic images and text, so it doesn't become completely overwhelming for the average reader, hopefully. In terms of overall notes, I've already passed this along to some degree, but I'll just say it here too. We have been talking about IAP as the framework that we're going to be using for community engagement in the future. And I know that work has been happening independent of the comprehensive plan, so I don't expect it to be in here at this point, but I would love for there to be a review from one of our staff who has been trained before we get to the final draft that's really going out there, to make sure that the comprehensive plan, in the way we talk about community engagement, is reflecting that training and that new knowledge that we expect to be using going forward. That's my one big overview note.
Yeah, Mary did go through the IAP2 training, so, I mean, it's obviously always good to have some external eyes on it as well, but we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just picking out places in the language, particularly around community engagement, and I can send an email to you all about that, but places where it seemed like it was maybe not necessarily in conflict with IAP, but there were ways that it would be improved and clarified.
Do you want to do your list?
No? I was hoping other people would have things to say.
I have a couple things that I think are just, you know, there's some language on WS 13, I think, in Milwaukee's history, and I think, you know, we have this meeting set up. The mayor and I are going to go out to the tribe, and I think placeholdering this language and making sure that we get, you know, actually run this language by the tribe, but also get better language. I think that it certainly will be improved. Oh, I apologize for that.
Yeah.
I was 10 minutes late because of my, so then we can skip that, so that's great. And then also, maybe this was already mentioned too, but I think in the housing background summary, I really think that, you know, we miss an opportunity by not mentioning the history of exclusion in Milwaukee housing. The history of exclusion in housing specifically, it's not by accident that we remain 84% white, and I think we need to address that here.
Maybe we can include a graphic of the new portrait of Florence that's in the library. And I wanted to go back to WS 13, actually, because I don't have a good fix for this, and maybe I'm out of line here, but the phrase, and I'm sorry, I'm doing wordsmithing, but since the arrival of European explorers and American pioneers, Milwaukee has such a rich tradition of people who, when you say the words American pioneers, are not necessarily the people that pop into mind. I'm thinking of Ah Bing, the developer of the Bing Cherry, who was originally a worker of Chinese descent who came to Milwaukee. I don't know that there's a way that we can improve that language, but I just note that there's potential for that to be read in a way that is perceived as white European descent settlers, not the full complement of people who arrived during the westward expansion.
Yeah, and that was a major comment, especially from the Planning Commission.
Great.
Commissioner Hemer and others, just, and we're probably going to be doing a kind of a total scrub of that section and just building it back up from the ground up. And so, yeah, no, I appreciate the feedback.
Great. You're all staring at me. I can just send a big long email.
Last night,
Yeah.
you know,
Down to the three of us.
So just need to have to keep talking.
I know Wilda has something to say.
Yeah, but it's, go ahead, because I'm looking for the page number. It's probably the other way. I had it in my head.
You have anything else?
Those were my two main points. So it sounds like we've covered them.
Overall, I thought the document was arranged really, really well. And the page I was looking for is that one page that says, this is how you use this. These little boxes, if you go here, then it goes there, and you got all these things. Because the common householder out there, or somebody that's, just interested in the city itself or whatever, is going to be able to read it, they're going to be able to understand it, and they're going to know the whys and wherefores of how it was put together. So, as just a city resident, I think that they, just in general, if you're not somebody that sits on the planning commission or a CPAC, no, not that page, just another one that's...
27?
27, that's right.
WS 27.
Great diagram of how to use this document. If you didn't sit on CPAC, if you're not on some of the other city committees, if you're not a planning commissioner or haven't been or haven't sat on city council, you can still understand this document. I felt, anyhow, just trying to look at it. I actually shared it a little bit with a couple of friends of mine and said, what do you think? And they went, oh, guys, that's pretty cool. So just FYI on that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I thought that turned out really well. So.
And I think the calling out what's in the glossary, the underlining to call out, I think that's really helpful and something that our current comp plan definitely doesn't have.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be good for all of us to read it, and maybe to some degree, those of you who weren't on the CPAC even more, to think about terms that is there something here that should be in the glossary that's not? Or is there something here that does warrant a call-out box for which there isn't one, you know? Because we all have the lingo, but we have to read it from the eyes of somebody who doesn't know what all the lingo.
That's true, and yet I find that at the same time, I mean, a lot of times for me, when I'm reading city documents, you know, and then I keep Google up on another tab so that I can Google, you know, find this for me, find that for me, you know, acronyms especially.
Yeah.
I mean, acronyms are, you know. But I do that when I'm reading regular books, too. I found a new word today. I'm like, oh, never heard that before. Okay. You know, so.
And we looked at some of the cities that have updated their comp plans more recently, Portland, Hillsborough, Lake Oswego, others. And the length of their glossaries kind of varied. Portland's is about 27 or 28 pages long, which is probably a little bit long. And some of them, ours was longer before we'd had kind of our consultants take a first crack at it, and then I edited it, and Denny provided his comments, and this is actually a lot shorter than it was originally. There were just a lot of terms that, you know, were helpful, but, you know, are things that were kind of more common sense and not so much technical terms. So we tried to limit it a little bit more to that, understanding that if somebody doesn't understand a word as opposed to a term, that they're probably just going to look it up, and we didn't really want to have a 30-page glossary. So.
On WS 49, in that first paragraph, we're talking about changing climate and adaptation to increased threats. It would be nice, I think, if we could also have a sentence there about our role in minimizing or mitigating our production of greenhouse gases. Because we always try and talk about climate change as mitigation and adaptation, and here we're only talking about adaptation.
All right, great.
I'm trying to go through all my notes and figure out what things I should really say so that we can have a discussion about whether or not they're appropriate and which things I can just email to you all. I did have a question about WS 116. There's a specific call out of Kellogg there. And let me get
116?
WS 116.
I'm actually looking at a slightly newer version of the document. Do you have
Yeah.
the page number that would be in the bottom left of the actual document?
113. And it's one of the restrictive services in terms of growth and additional capacity is sewage treatment at the Kellogg Water Resource Recovery Facility. And this keeps coming up in different conversations well outside of comp plan. And I feel like this is a newbie not knowing the full story, because my understanding is that we have the Tri-Cities plant, we have interties with the Tri-Cities plant. There's more flexibility in the system than there was previously, and that Kellogg is not the sole place where Milwaukee's sewage gets treated. Am I misunderstanding that?
Sorta.
Okay.
So the interties, if I'm remembering the system well, occur actually upstream of Milwaukee. So before Happy Valley and Milwaukee were treated here.
Right.
Only a portion of Happy Valley is treated here. A lot of it goes in the intertie. I don't know that anything from Milwaukee proper, or at least not much from Milwaukee proper, other than solids getting trucked down.
Right.
Which is a totally different thing. But
Right.
if you're just talking about raw effluent, it's
Okay.
still treating.
We're still treating ours. So I guess so I don't have it quite right in that those interties do mean that there is more flexibility in the overall system so they can divert more, because we still treat quite a bit of Happy Valleys right now because that plant is considerably under capacity right now. Okay.
So, yeah, you would be correct that there would be potential for more capacity for Milwaukee based on the fact that pretty much all of Happy Valleys would be able to be sent to Tri-Cities.
Right, but that helps me understand why this language is the way it is in here. I think it's slightly misleading, but I think that's just how it's got to be.
We can work on that. though.
Maybe it could be wordsmithed, I mean, just to also, and I mean, you know, it's only restricted in terms of what its current capacity is, right? But that can always be improved. So I don't know that restrictive is really the right word to
Yeah.
describe it. I mean, I think that, you know, the sentence above it sort of makes clear to me that, you know, that we need to plan for additional capacity, and then following up by then saying, you know,
But this is a
it almost
restraining
feels like
thing.
it's like a concrete restriction. Like,
Right.
and that's not really true.
No more so than any other piece of infrastructure.
Exactly.
Very expensive infrastructure.
Well,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
It's still man-made infrastructure.
Show me a piece of infrastructure that isn't expensive.
Right.
No, I understand.
They're ridiculous.
Yeah,
They
and
are.
it's not all entirely under our control. I mean, I think that's.
Of course.
part
Sure,
of it.
sure.
There's that.
I don't mean to diminish it, I just also don't mean to aggrandize it in the document, that's all. I think that's all that really qualifies on my list. I think everything else I can just email to you guys.
Great. Thank you.
All right, is that everybody?
It's 2 meetings in a row
That
where we
was the
get out of
easiest-
the.
You're probably your easiest night right there.
I know. We get done with CPAC half an hour early and done by 4:30. Gonna ride this.
That's 3, right? So that's all you get.
That is it. So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, David.
All right. Next up, we have Metro Parks and Nature Bond local share discussion. This will be staffed by our Assistant City Manager, Kelly Brooks.
And I know some of the other PARB, a couple of them are here, but a couple more PARB members are planning on attending, but they've got 4:45 as their target time.
Oh,
I am going to have Ben come.
should we?
Speak very slowly. I mean, I can keep pulling things off my list, but it would be such a letdown for David.
You what? Yeah, he dashed. Too bad.
Yeah,
He's already saying, what?
he knows better.
Okay, get out of here while the kitten's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Kelly Brooks, Assistant City Manager, and I'm joined by Ben Johnson. He is our Vice Chair of PARB right now. Lisa Lashbrook is our Chair, but she couldn't join us tonight. She needs to help with family. So Ben's here to help make sure that I capture kind of the ongoing conversation we've had at PARB around this topic, and also just add as he sees fit. So the purpose of tonight is to just give you a very high-level overview of the funding available from the Metro Bond and discuss some options for local share allocation and where PARB has settled in terms of their recommendation right now to you all for consideration. We are very early in this process. The bond just passed. We have time, but we felt like it was a helpful way for us to help to structure goal setting for PARB, and it's also really important in our partner conversations with NCPRD, just to get a sense of where we're headed, because these bond funds don't come around very often. So, and we've talked here about this before. These are all the different pots of funds that are in the bond that passed in November. All the ones with lines through it, I'm not going to talk about tonight because those are largely outside of our control. It doesn't mean that at some point we won't be engaged in conversations around those items. But tonight specifically, I'll be talking about the local share. It's a $92 million pot of funds. $1.127 million is a direct allocation to Milwaukee. And then NCPRD, the district, also gets a direct allocation, which is $4.5 million. Just talking about Milwaukee's tonight, not NCPRD's. They'll run a process of their own to allocate those resources. The other thing that I did learn today, they're doing the bond sale this like the earliest funds will be available is late this spring, early summer. They are reimbursement-based funds, so I think there's quite a bit of time before we would actually see these dollars come into the city, but at the same time, it's still nice to know which direction we're headed in. The other one I'll touch on just briefly are the Nature and Neighborhood Capital Grants. That's a $40 million pot, and it can be a useful way to help round out project budgets or pursue future projects that we can't get to with local share. So we'll talk about that briefly as well. So that's the dollar amount. It's 1.127 million, does not go very far, but we're going to try to make it go as far as we can. So what we can do with it, we can acquire parkland or natural areas. We can do fish and wildlife habitat restoration. We can maintain or develop the public access facilities and parks that we have today. We can design and construct local or regional trails. We can do an enhanced or new learning, environmental educational facilities. And I just added there at the bottom that it is a reimbursement-based program. So these funds are quite flexible. There will be more rules that come with them that we don't have yet. But even when those rules come through, they will be some of the most flexible dollars that we have in order to construct parks with. Nature and Neighborhoods is different. So it's a grant program. It's really been reworked. It's been grown, so it's larger than it was last time. And it's intended to support community-driven initiatives. Partnership is key. They really want you partnering with not just governments, but if you can be working with community organizations, that's really important. It's for capital only. They don't want ongoing maintenance. The match is made more flexible this time. So in the past, you would have a pretty set match, either 12.7% or 20%. This time, because they don't want to exclude a full range of different entities that might apply, they've made that match more flexible. You also have to, though, demonstrate your ability to maintain, and again, this goes to our partnership with NCPRD, who's also here tonight. We can build it, but if they won't maintain it, then it won't work out so great. So we continue discussing our options with them. And then there's a whole long list of program criteria that I didn't want to list because it was too many. So I just said we have to just satisfy one of them. So at PAR, we started talking about local share probably in August. We did a kind of a parks tour. We had some new members, and we went and looked at kind of a range of the different parks that we have. So we have our fully developed parks. We have our parks that are somewhat developed, but we want to do more too. And then we have our undeveloped parks. So we did a tour of different facilities and just talked about where we wanted to go. And it started to kind of become apparent that we knew we had needs at Scott Park, because we have the library project and we weren't able to do the park project at the same time. There'd been a lot of interest and had been discussion through the Planning Commission and Council process about incorporating sort of a children's park, something that really leveraged the new library. So that popped up on the list. Milwaukee Bay Park, we've talked about it a lot here. Most folks know that we're well into completing the design of the third phase of the project. And that we have committed some funds already to that project. So that has been an ongoing priority. All of PARB had served on the committee that helped do the design, so very familiar with the project. And then we have Dogwood Park. So Dogwood Park has been sort of a construction staging site for, past year and a half or so. We also have a development that's going in right there at the plaza. So we have funded a teeny little design project with Lingo Hansen, who's the landscape architect for the Coho project, largely to make sure that we know where the paths need to go, but also to address some of the concerns that have come up from the community along the way. What kind of shade might be available? That's something people have been worried about. We'd had concerns from the market about what storage options might be available once we moved to that site. So we'd had kind of a little laundry list of things popping up. So we wanted to keep some resources involved and engaged at Dogwood Park in order to implement some of the elements from that design, which may not be able to be accommodated through the Coho development. So it's small, but it's there. So we went back and forth. We looked at kind of a full range of different options, and we also talked some about Balfour. So we have two undeveloped parks right now, Bowman Bray and Balfour. So we spent some time talking about those. Of the two, Balfour kind of percolated in terms of where our conversation centered. We do have a lot of development happening in that part of town. And we also had an interest in looking at things that were on that side of 224. And so we did spend some time talking about Balfour. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned it in the staff report, ultimately it wasn't quite as ready as some of the other ones on the list. And also it had, we are going to be seeing parks SDCs generated from the developments right around it. And so it made sense to kind of queue it up to receive those SDCs as they come in from the different projects that are coming online. And we also did hope that it could be a good contender for grants. So in the end, the two options mainly came down to whether or not you wanted to kind of fully fund Scott Park at about $580,000, $590,000, or you wanted to partially fund Scott Park so that you could provide more resources to Milwaukee Bay Park. So that was the primary thing that PARB discussed at the last meeting. They decided and recommended that you actually do more resources on Milwaukee Bay Park because they think Scott Park could be a really good candidate for grant funding. So this was the scenario that they came up with. So $750,000 local share goes to Milwaukee Bay Park. That brings you up to a total of $1 million committed from the city for that project. It sends a pretty strong message that we are committed, that we want the project to happen, which hopefully will help encourage our partners at NCPRD and within the district to support allocating additional resources to that project as well, which are going to be needed because, as you can see, it's an expensive project. So that's Milwaukee Bay Park. Scott Park, the other thing that we talked about a lot there is NCPRD has been great. They gave me some very rough sort of budget estimates just to give us in the ballpark of what I should be thinking in terms of cost. And we base them off of the Wichita cost, because that's the most recent park that we have. But we used a total square footage for Scott Park, which doesn't necessarily reflect all the constraints. It's pretty small. So we're going to do a scoping exercise in January, February timeframe, actually really go look at it and see what you really would be doing, how much square footage you would really be touching or impacting there. And I think there's a chance that that dollar amount could also just come down from the 590 once you really right-size the project. Not sure. But so that's why they got comfortable with the, okay, let's do the lower dollar amount for Scott Park. But because we have really good community partnerships with that project and it's pretty unique in terms of its connection to the library, we'll go out for grant money. Then just don't totally defund Dogwood Park, right? You have to do something at Dogwood Park. You don't have to build the moon and stars, but it's an important, and Ben's actually been kind of one of the most articulate spokespeople for don't forget about Dogwood Park. Because it is important and it is a place that our community is going to be spending more and more time. So this is more on the scale of landscaping. You know, you're not going to see a lot, but it can try to help make sure that we can implement some of those like softer elements of the design. And those little design shreds, it's kind of a mini engagement process that we're running. We'll start after the first of the year. So. And then the timelines, I would say the most confidence I have, well, 2022, Milwaukee Bay Park, that's still the construction target for that project. Scott Park, even though that's a smaller project and could potentially move faster, I put it at 2022 just because of the grant piece. So if we're grant funding it, I can't really control as much when we would get those resources, so I put it in 2022 as well. And then Dogwood Park, it's small. My hope is we would get that done faster. So.
What, other than perhaps planting trees sort of further away from the new building, wouldn't we kind of want to wait until they were done driving big yellow machines around to?
Yes, we would. And so I should definitely work closely with our community development director on timing of the actual delivery of that project, so no one runs over it.
It's delivering quite that fast.
Yeah. So I may be too aggressive, and Layla can come up at Coho and say Kelly's crazy, which is possible. But yeah, absolutely. We've done enough. I don't want to do it twice.
Yeah.
So, but we have to move. We have to keep moving on the design aggressively because of that project, though. We have the path as a part of it has to get constructed, and we need to know
where
that is and what it is, so that it ends up in the right spot.
Right.
So the aggressive timing around the design that has to keep moving. But yes, I recognize.
So you said 2021 construction.
Yeah.
You meant 2021 design.
I meant 2021 construction, but you're probably right to call me out for that. Yeah. So, mean, I meant that I thought I could get it done
Building
first.
might
Yeah.
Constructed by, or even
Well, the
close.
foundation part of it might be.
Still might have trucks driving over
There's-
trees
Good.
and
I
ripping
would
things
not-
out of the ground.
I mean, maybe at the far end, you could
Yeah.
plant some trees and stuff, but I don't know that I'd do anything like this side of the
Plaza.
new plaza.
I mean, they're going to lose all they're going to be pretty constricted
Yeah,
on what they
exactly.
can
They
do.
got
They're going to
very
lose
little
that parking
place to
lot
work
to
with,
park
so.
their trucks.
Maybe I
It's
was
gonna be
thinking that the parts that would be constructed with the project, but yes, I don't want to do that. So let me change how I talk about it so that it's clear we're not planting and running things over again with construction equipment, and that it's more aligned with the Coho project schedule.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ben, you had,
Yeah, PARB's real interest was to ensure that there's some flexibility in the language with where these pots of money could go, because it's hard to assign a dollar figure to something that's not really designed or planned, and just using rough square footage costs, because Wichita Park is a pretty open and active park with playground equipment and curbing and things like that, and it had a half-street improvement. And Scott Park could look very, very different. A lot of it's could be wooded, planted, native plants, simple gravel paths. But what we're interested in Scott Park is something that relates to the children's wing of the library. I think Lisa Lashbrook might have presented this a few years ago, maybe even just a year ago, but having something that really relates to the kids' activities in the library, having it learning focused, natural education. So I think that would bode well for any sort of grant funding, especially from Metro with the nature and neighborhoods. So again, like, these to me are decent ballpark figures, but hopefully there's some flexibility in it as the two spaces are designed, and figuring out what Coho is going to pitch in and what actually can be developed, like in Dogwood. Is there a need for more hardscape for, event space and music when the market's going on? Because I think the market folks presented some sort of temporary cargo container that kind of opened up to be like a bandstand. Yeah, and my concern was with accessibility. And if that whole side of town is going to get buttoned up soon, it would be nice if that was the one reason why I kept saying, don't forget about Dogwood, because if with all the activity going on down there, it would be nice to have Dogwood kind of complete and what it could be. And we'll just see what it could be, because we really don't know at this time.
Yeah, that's a good point. They wanted to, I didn't put the language in here, but it would need to come back with the final, if you all agree, the recommendation about kind of, that as we know more about numbers, that the dollars can flow between these projects, as, if one's coming in lower and one's coming in.
Because I do think the point that, that Wichita included a half-street improvement and sidewalks and everything is something that Scott Park won't, that's already there for Scott Park for the most part. So, yeah, hopefully the dollar figure shouldn't be as high as it was for Wichita, yeah.
Yeah, we're hopeful. I mean, there's a certain amount of just doing it cost. But yes, that's our hope, is that when you go look at it and kind of apply all the constraints of the site, that it won't have some of the same factors at Wichita. Anything else from Harb that I should mention?
I just want to say that we are super excited about the Metro bond passing and the opportunity that this is going to have. And we were hoping that a park on the east side would have been included in this, but once we just saw how far you can take 1.12 million, you either can do a little bit to a lot of things, or do some meaningful things with it. And because of the priority with Milwaukee Bay, that really sucks up a lot of the resources. So that's why we wanted to make sure that anything that happens next after these is the Balfour or another park on the east side is next in line.
Well, and I appreciated you calling out all of the SDC funds that will be coming in right around there, because that made me feel better about having left off an east side location for the time being.
We also do, even though, we're talking parks capital here, but there's a lot of capital. almost an exhausting amount of capital going in on that side of town too.
Yeah,
So between
absolutely.
Monroe and Linwood and a pretty large stormwater project and, quite a few things. So it's something too, just as we move forward, we're going to have to talk not just about our park development projects, but all of our CIP and all our SAFE projects so that people can see that investment.
Yeah.
So
It was less about the dollar figure and
Yeah.
more about
just act.
intensification and being ready to continue to have the appropriate quality of life ready for folks as they are arriving.
Yes, good point. Yes. So that's kind of it for this. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I raised in the staff report that I did not talk to you about. I don't think so. So I was going to do next steps and then just open it up to you all so you can tell me how close we're getting and what kind of feedback and other factors that we should continue talking about before you want to make a more formal recommendation. So I'm hoping to come back to you all with a more finalized formal recommendation on kind of where to spend these resources in January, February. Then I'm going to keep coordinating with NCPRD on a funding strategy for Milwaukee Bay Park. It's not just our local share. There's other local share and other resources that need to come in to round out that budget figure. I'm hoping I'll have more information to share about that and more finalized information to share in the spring. Like I said, we're going to do that scoping trip over to Scott Park, see if we can get a better sense of costs on that. And then after that, again, it would just be pursuing kind of a lot of the grant opportunities. I have been saying, and I would like to keep us limited to 2 grant applications. I think if we do more than 2, we will do them badly, and we will compete with ourselves. So I have been kind of cautioning folks, just since this is a small amount of money, it's kind of easy to be like, oh, well, why don't we just do grants for everything that we can't use this for? And the answer is we can't really, because then I will do bad grant applications. I think we'd be looking at in the next couple years 2 nature and neighborhood grant opportunities as well. I think that's it. What do you think?
No, I really appreciate, the really thoughtful conversation around, the real need, the lack of green space on the east side and the importance of making sure that doesn't, that the PARB, is really thinking, very, very much about that and, just sort of the inequity there. And so I think that it would be great to maybe, in the next report, when it does come back for adoption, maybe just a little bit of discussion about what some of those, what those anticipated SDCs are, when we might expect to see some of those in terms of real dollars, and then maybe what other, what the other sort of resources that you might be considering going after. I know it's a really early in that sort of crystal ballish, but I think that to really give, me, and the public sort of a better sense for, those conversations that you're having, I think they would be really great to have them reflected here.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. I think Allie, who I didn't introduce, who's our newest PARB member, I don't know if any other PARB members have come yet, but Allie, she had some good language, which I think if I keep following her train will help meet some of your needs, but it's about that intentionality piece. So what are the next steps in terms of how you could, what East Side Park process could look like, all that. So I think rounding that out, to your point, and some of the conversation we had at PARB to reflect that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me after listening to you that you were having real conversations about that issue, and it strikes me that, for those of the listening public, or not listening public, just reading this, they might not really grasp the full, the real intention and the scope of those conversations.
I can add that.
I'm glad you were really thinking about Scott Park. For a lot of reasons. One, there were certain commitments we sort of made when we did the library and the way we parsed the money and all the stuff we had to do. So it's important that we get that built. But I think the other part is that there's a lot of opportunity there, right? It's going to be a natural magnet for kids, and doing some cool nature play mixed in with this, you've got the pond and you've got the forest, and it just seems like there's a opportunity to do something really unique and very kid-oriented in that park and make it something that, would just be like the perfect place for a family to come and hang out. And the kid that loves to read can go read, and the kid that loves to,
Just to add on that, the Waldorf School, we met with them about a month ago, and they have really struggled with students, individuals coming onto their campus when it's not during the school day, when they shouldn't be playing on their space. So they're also incredibly supportive of us coming up with a play space where when they have to go out and talk to a family and say, we're actually currently in session, we need you to leave the property, that they can point and say, but we love that you're outside with your kids. Could you please go use the space, kitty corner from here? So both the principal, the chair of the board, and their grounds maintenance person have all been really supportive of that attribute in particular.
They have the best climbing structure in
really
town.
do, which
so,
I'm not sure we can
I've
top.
held meetings on that play structure, so I would suggest we find out who designed it and replicate
Oh, it came to planning commission, yeah.
Yeah, Scott and I did that while we were on the, but yeah, it'd be cool to put something, something that's really fun like that.
At
over
the
there
new city hall.
Or that. But you know what I mean? Like make that really our kids' park. And it's got a lot of good opportunity.
Well, and I'll just add to that when we're thinking about kid opportunities, don't lose sight of the all ages aspect as well, because I see a lot of grandparents taking their kids to the library, and if there's a way that play space and that park can encourage intergenerational interactions, I think that would be really a bonus for us all, because our population includes kids, but it also includes a higher than average number of more senior residents. So ways that we can serve everyone are pretty cool.
Well, and thinking about serving everyone, there's also the all abilities
Right.
areas of parks, and how can we make sure that we're doing the best we can and offering the best we can for
That's a good
Various
point.
abilities.
I mean, and I do think there was a big article recently about Happy Valley doing a new all abilities play area, and I think between what we're doing on Milwaukee Bay Park and what we're doing in Scott Park, maybe one of the two does need to have an all abilities kind of.
And I know there's
I think
interest.
especially Milwaukee Bay Park, because it's going to have a greater, overall use, I would think. I mean, it's a bigger area, it's going to have more attractions, whatever. So having something that's an area of, or the whole thing for kids or whatever, but having the all abilities areas, I think, is becoming more and more important. I mean, years ago, nobody would have, didn't think about that. But, yeah.
Well, and I know that there's folks on PARB who are excited about these sorts of ideas, so I trust we'll hear more from PARB about that in the future.
That's all we got today.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to the PARB members that were here. Appreciate it.
Awesome. The
And
NCPRD members.
Yeah, and the NCPRD folks that are here. Thank you.
Is there anything else you guys want to?
There's nothing we can move up, so I think you all just get a break.
What?
Shocking. See, you should have done all
I
your
totally
little-
should have.
Why I needed time
You're welcome,
to read
David.
something I didn't finish reading anyway, so.
All right, well, then
I'm
we
not
are
complaining.
adjourned until 6 o'clock for the regular session.
Just means I have to